Chapters I. The Church Test Oaths. Surely we ought not to be obliged to declare what we believe or do not believe as the price of suffrage. Our consciences are at least our own. George Buchanan, Day. News, February 21, 1890. A religious test oath is contrary to the rights of conscience as given by God. The conscience has its obligation. It is one of the principal rights and privileges of freedom. An article of Mormon faith is that we claim the privilege of worshipping Almighty God according to the dictates of our conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. It is the creed of the Latter-day Saints to follow their own conscience. Secondly, to allow others the same privilege. A religious test oath is a contradiction to both. Politically, such an oath is just as wrong. Such illegal test oaths were once used by the government. During the debate on such practices with the Edmunds-Tucker bill, Senator Vest made this statement. The whole spirit of this test oath legislation is wrong. It is contrary to the principles and spirit of our Republican institutions, and whenever the time comes in the territories or states of this Union that test oaths are necessary to preserve Republican institutions, then Republicanism is at an end. The government once used these oaths against the Church. Now the Church uses them against their own members. It is sad to see men in leadership positions attempting to use their priesthood authority to coerce others into sustaining them. A righteous man would refuse to sustain anyone for using compulsory means to bind him into such subjection. But worst of all is the fact that leading men of the Church are excommunicating people because they will not repudiate a divine principle, one that is clearly sustained in the revelations and standard works of the Church. Men must often relinquish their membership in the Church because they believe all the revelations of God and refuse to sign a test oath against them. To sign an oath against personal beliefs is a compromise of principle. One of these examples of compromising was the case of Matthias F. Cowley. He had once been asked to be temporarily released from the Quorum of 12 as a mission to help get the government off the back of the Church. Later, the First Presidency required him to make a written confession to come back into the fellowship of the Church. Reconciliation. Letters passing between the First Presidency and Elder Matthias F. Cowley. The following letters have passed between Elder Matthias F. Cowley and the First Presidency. They are self-explanatory. Salt Lake City, Utah. April 1, 1936. To the Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Dear Brethren, this is to confess that I have been deceived, and to say that wherever and whenever I have given counsel or taken action contrary to the principles, rules, and regulations of the Church, as adopted by the Church and in force, I have been wholly in error in counsel, and my actions have been null and void. This I now plainly see and freely confess, and humbly and with a contrite spirit of true repentance, I ask forgiveness. I honestly and solemnly pledge myself hereafter to live, to act, and to counsel in strict accordance with the principles, rules, and regulations of the Church as adopted by the Church. My heart is in the work of the Lord and always has been from my childhood. If there is anything I prize more than another, it is to have the love and approval of God, and the fellowship, love, and confidence of you, His servants, who represent Him here upon the earth. I have made mistakes, I have suffered for them, I confess them, and trust that you will pardon and forgive the same. I wish to assure you that I have no sympathy for the attitude taken by mischief makers who are trying to belittle and to belie the authorities of the Church, nor have I a fellowship with them. I have never been associated with them in any way. I have never failed to take advantage of every opportunity which has presented itself to speak against those who are opposing the authorities of the Church. You are at liberty to publish this letter if you so desire. Trusting that you will consider me worthy of your forgiveness and confidence, I am, as ever, your friend and brother, Matthias F. Cowley. Mental coercion also existed in the early days of the Church, and the prophet Joseph Smith said, "All have the privilege of thinking for themselves upon all matters relative to conscience. Consequently then, we are not disposed, had we the power, to deprive anyone of exercising that free independence of mind, which Heaven has so graciously bestowed upon the human family as one of its choicest gifts." TPJS, page 49. Later, when an elderly gentleman, Peletiah Brown, misinterpreted some Bible passages, he was called up before the High Council of the Church. When Joseph heard of it, he replied, "I did not like the old man being called up for erring in doctrine. It looks too much like the Methodists, and not like the Latter-day Saints. Methodists have creeds which a man must believe or be asked out of their church. I want the liberty of thinking and believing as I please. It feels so good not to be trammeled. It does not prove that a man is not a good man because he errs in doctrine. DHC 5:340. That policy continued down through the church to the time of Joseph F. Smith, the predecessor of Heber J. Grant. Press. Smith declared, "We desire that the Latter-day Saints will exercise the liberty wherewith they have been made free by the gospel of Jesus Christ, for they are entitled to know the right from the wrong, to see the truth and draw the line between it and error. And it is their privilege to judge for themselves and to act upon their own free agency, with regard to their choice as to sustaining or otherwise those who should exercise the presiding functions among them." Gospel Doctrine, Joseph F. Smith, page 60. Freedom of thought began to be lost within the church shortly after the turn of the century. It continued to wane until the 1930s, when the subjugation of mind was enforced with the written test oath. Right bracket the Short Creek episode. Picture of Short Creek. Short Creek, Arizona, a small community with very few families, on the southern Utah border, was to gain international fame. It all began in the spring of 1935, when their peaceful little branch received a church test oath. The members were all told to sign the anti-polygamy oath, or they would be excommunicated. President Heber J. Grant was then president of the church. He had once lived plural marriage, but now was the perpetrator for this declaration repudiating that doctrine. How strange that he was compelling monogamists and bachelors to repudiate a belief in a doctrine that he had practiced. The president of the church was excommunicating men for belief in a principle which he himself had lived. Right bracket the following test oath was given to members of the Short Creek branch, which all the members, with the exception of one family, refused to sign. 21 members were excommunicated as the result. A copy of this first test oath at Short Creek, in 1935, follows. To whom it may concern I, the undersigned member of the Short Creek branch of the Rockville Ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, solemnly declare and affirm that I, without any mental reservation whatever, support the presidency of the Church, and that I repudiate those who are falsely accusing them, and that I denounce the practice and advocacy of plural marriage as being out of harmony with the declared principles of the Church at the present time. Signed ________________________ This was perhaps the beginning of the use of test oaths in the Church. This oath is clearly meant to coerce members into supporting and sustaining the leaders of the Church with a blind obedience. Even if the members didn't believe in plural marriage, they couldn't sign this oath if they were intelligent enough not to consign their eternal destiny into the hands of mortal men. It explains that any mental reservation for not supporting the leaders is a sin worthy of excommunication. Being subject to a leadership which requires such servitude without any mental reservation whatsoever is equal to the demands of any European or Oriental dictator. This type of subjugation is slavery for both the body and the mind. None of the honorable ancient prophets ever demanded such servitude. The Lord said that all things must be done in order and by common consent in the Church, by the prayer of faith. But if members of the Church must sign statements forcing them to sustain the leaders without any mental reservation whatever, then why should any voting to sustain the leaders be called for at conference time? Common consent by voting is done away by the demands of a test oath, and all this with the threat of excommunication. 21 members refused to sign the Short Creek test oath, which resulted in the inactivity of over 100 members. This test oath by the Church resulted in Short Right bracket Creeks becoming one of the biggest headaches the Church has ever had. At first the Church used test oaths, then excommunication. Finally, in the effort to stamp out the doctrine of plural marriage, they assisted in civil prosecutions. But each time the Church made efforts to destroy the principle of plural marriage, it created only more publicity for that doctrine. 3 major prosecutions against Short Creek only caused sympathy and interest from people all over the world. These raids made headlines in the nation's newspapers, and those who persisted the most in the persecutions would eventually suffer the most. With the raid in 1935 came the publication of Truth magazine, which presented a defense for the polygamist's own story. This magazine became exceedingly popular and gained a distribution throughout the country. Many church members and other American citizens were interested in the Short Creek story. They wanted to know the reasons why those saints were keeping alive those principles which once characterized the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Another test oath came out in the church about 4 years after the one used at Short Creek. It was revised and used in many of the wards and branches. This second test oath read, 1. That I solemnly declare and affirm that I support the presidency and apostles and the other general authorities of the church. 2. That I accept and believe the solemn affirmation by the presidency and apostles of the church that no one of them is living a double life, that I repudiate those who are accusing them of leading such a life. 3. That I accept the official declaration or manifesto of October 6, 1890, as interpreted by the President of the Church and accepted by the Church, as being the word and the will of the Lord to this people and Church on the subject of plural marriage. 4. That we believe and accept the articles of faith of the Church promulgated by the prophet Joseph, and have particularly in mind Article 12 thereof. We believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. 5. That I denounce the practice and advocacy of plural marriage as contrary to the word and will of the Lord and to the declared principles governing the Church as adopted by the Church in accordance to the word and will of the Lord, and that I, myself, am not living in such marriage relationship nor counseling, nor advising others to do so. This second test oath dropped some of the objectionable features of the first one, but it added a few more. The clause of without any mental reservation whatsoever was left out, but it added the demand to not only support the presidency of the Church, but also the quorum of 12 and other general authorities. They also added the clause which indicates that plural marriage was done away by the manifesto by the word and will of the Lord. The living a double life clause was inserted because members knew that some of the general authorities lived plural marriage after the manifesto. Notwithstanding such things did occur, and are matters of history, yet this oath requires members by covenant to state that they will not believe it, even if they may know it is the truth. This oath would force any knowledgeable members to a lie. Shortly after the second test oath, the Church came out with another revised edition. I, the undersigned, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, residing in ward, ward, stake, do hereby solemnly declare and affirm that I accept and fully subscribe to the official declaration or manifesto adopted by the Church, October 6, 1890, prohibiting the practice of plural marriage. And that I also fully accept the declarations of the presidents of the Church, since the issuance of the manifesto, as prohibitions against such practice, the President of the Church having the sole authority to solemnize or authorize the solemnization of such marriages. I further declare that I am not living in the so-called plural marriage relationship, which is now pretendedly solemnized by unauthorized persons, is an adulterous relationship, nor counseling or advising others to do so. That I am in full sympathy with the attitude and practice of the presidency of the Church in their effort to free the Church by excommunication or otherwise of those who bring reproach upon it, and who themselves sin by endeavoring and conniving to perpetuate the practice of this illegal and sinful relationship. Signature in the presence of witnesses. An elder in Rexburg, Idaho, refused to sign this test oath and wrote the following well-defined response. Rexburg, Idaho. November 18, 1939. Rexburg Stake Presidency. Rexburg, Idaho. Dear brethren. Inasmuch as you are under orders to require my signature to a pledge, the purpose of which I can only surmise, I feel that I must qualify the same by giving you my understanding of its contents, and so I will treat it in its 5 major points, each in their order. First, that I solemnly declare and affirm that I support the presidency and apostles and the other general authorities of the Church. This matter we have discussed before. Particularly have I been questioned concerning my belief in the President and his qualification as prophet, seer, and revelator. Now it seems to me that we should be reluctant to embarrass the President by forcing him to divulge these qualifications. I have heard it affirmed that he has never received a revelation. Can anyone state from knowledge that he possesses the seer stone, the requisite of a seer? Has anyone ever heard him prophesy? No doubt it was an unpleasant experience for President Joseph F. Smith to testify under oath in the Smoot investigation concerning such matters, and to state that while he was designated as a prophet, seer, and revelator, that he has never received a revelation for the Church or an individual revelation for himself. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Second, that I accept and believe the solemn affirmation by the presidency and apostles of the Church that no one of them is living a double life, that I repudiate those who are accusing them of leading such a life. To this proposition I cannot reply because I know nothing regarding their private lives, and my testimony regarding the same would have no value in any court in the land. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Third, that I accept the OFFICIAL Declaration or Manifesto of October 6, 1890, as interpreted by the President of the Church and accepted by the Church, as being the word and the will of the Lord to this people and Church on the subject of plural marriage. This statement is not clear to my mind. Does being the word and will of the Lord mean that it was a revelation? It was not considered as such until recent date. The subject is so vast that space does not permit me to dwell upon it. Suffice it to say I have gone through a bound volume of the Deseret News of 1890. I read all the sermons delivered at the conference at which the manifesto was presented, and nothing was said indicating that the Lord had anything to do with it. Fourth, that we believe and accept the articles of faith of the Church promulgated by the prophet Joseph, and have particularly in mind Article 12 thereof. We believe in being subject to kings' right presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. I can subscribe to this without reservation providing the 11th article is included, which reads, "We claim the privilege of worshipping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. May I say in this connection, if I was forced to make a choice between obeying a law of God and an unrighteous human law, I would not pledge myself to obey the latter. Blackstone has said in connection with this subject, "Any law that runs counter to divine law is invalid." Fifth, that I denounce the practice and advocacy of plural marriage as contrary to the word and will of the Lord, and to the declared principles governing the Church as adopted by the Church in accordance to the word and will of the Lord, and that I, myself, am not living in such marriage relationship nor counseling, nor advising others to do so. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Now, brethren, I have tried to state my position and understanding of these matters as I have found them to be. If I am in error I will be indeed grateful to the one that sets me right. From my youth I have had a love in my heart for the gospel of Jesus Christ, and have prized next to my mortal life my standing and membership in the Church, and acknowledge with gratitude the testimony and knowledge I have of God's work. My trust is not in man or in his precepts but in the Lord and in his eternal word. If the purpose or intent of this pledge is what I suspect it to be, to place a seal upon my lips, and to deprive me of the greatest heritage God has vouchsafed to man, my agency and right to live my own life, to think my own thoughts, and to voice my honest convictions, and to enjoy the rights guaranteed under the Constitution of our country, if such is the case, the very thought does violence to my conscience, for there are certain things that are dearer to me than life. Sincerely, your brother. Sig. Joseph T. Jones. Nevertheless, Elder Jones was excommunicated by the Church in spite of this reasonable and proper objection. Test oaths did not suffice as a means of destroying plural marriage. So the Church became involved in civil law and political intrigue in its effort to stop plural marriage. In 1935 plural marriage was changed on the statutes from being a misdemeanor to a felony. This was mostly, if not totally, the efforts of some of the leading elders of the Church. Hugh B. Brown, while Heber J. Grant was president of the Church, is known to have inspired this change. The maximum sentence as a misdemeanor was imprisonment for 6 months, but under a felony charge, it could bring a maximum sentence of 5 years in the state penitentiary. This bill was passed and known as HB 224, and is claimed to have been prepared by lawyer Hugh B. Brown, while he was president of Granite Stake. The bill was then fathered in the Utah legislature by Lyle B. Nichols, another Mormon official who was assisted by a church steering committee consisting of David O. McKay, who was the second counselor to President Heber J. Grant, and also by David A. Smith of the presiding bishopric of the church. On August 3, an Associated Press release from Kingman, Arizona, proclaimed that a polygamous colony existed in Short Creek, Arizona, and County Attorney Elmo Bollinger was quoted as saying, "Officials of the regular church, LDS, were assisting to bring about the arrest and conviction of polygamists," and David A. Smith, of the presiding bishopric, is quoted as saying that persons using the church as a cloak for such practices are bringing ill repute to us, and we are cooperating wherever possible in obtaining enforcement of the law. Short Creek was 78 miles from Cedar City, the nearest railroad point, and 25 miles from Hurricane, the nearest mercantile community, and 400 miles from Kingman, the Mohave County seat for Short Creek. It had a combination store and gas station, a post office, and about 20 houses. Kingman County rolled up its sleeves and decided that wholesale arrests would be made and the penitentiary would be filled with these monsters. But only 3 men and a woman were arrested. The trial was set for September 6. The little combination church schoolhouse was filled to capacity by people coming from hundreds of miles to see this show. Within a half hour all of the complaints were dismissed by the Justice of Peace J.M. Lauritsen because of improper pleadings by the county attorney. New complaints were prepared to be served on 3 men, Price Johnson, I.C. Spencer, and John Y. Barlow. Barlow was dismissed without a conviction or sentence, but Spencer and Johnson were sentenced from 18 to 24 months in prison. Shortly afterwards, Spencer wanted to sign something to get out of prison, but because of some contradictions in his case, they would not accept the offer. He spent nearly a year in prison, after which he was released with time off for good behavior. He eventually moved to Mexico where he died. Price Johnson also had to spend nearly a year in prison. While he was serving his time, he was offered a chance to sign a pledge or manifesto, but rather than make an agreement or commitment against the principles of his faith, he chose to remain in prison. His testimony is best expressed in his own words, for they have that ring of courage that inspires the hearts of all who hear them. Price Johnson. If I signed a manifesto denying that doctrine of my faith, it would undo all of the international publicity I have received for sustaining that principle. My time in prison would be a waste, and my life's work would be undone. Arizona State Prison, 1936. Once, while reading the Doctrine and Covenants, Price received a manifestation that the principle of plural marriage was a true doctrine, and that it should be lived. It was also made known to him who he was to invite into this principle with him. Shortly after this, Apostle Widsoe was traveling in that area, and Price told him all about his experience. The apostle turned to Price with tears in his eyes and said, "Brother Johnson, that's a genuine revelation from God, but don't obey it." Price asked him why revelation from God should not be obeyed, and Widsoe replied, "It's just a test to see if you will do it." In time Price met the Woolies and heard for the first time the story of the 1886 revelation, and also of the meeting that was held afterwards. Price Johnson became acquainted with John Woolley, Lauren Woolley, and Samuel Bateman on a personal and close relationship. Price was introduced to the whole story of the principle of plural marriage in 1924 when he visited John Woolley in his home in Centerville. He heard John's own testimony about the Savior and Joseph Smith coming there to visit John Taylor. Brother Woolley took Price into the room where John Taylor received the 1886 Revela-Tion, which was to continue that practice after the church abandoned it in 1890. Price said, "Brother Woolley bore witness to me that the Lord had prepared men to keep that principle alive when the church rejected it. And he said to me, I wonder if you can stand to endure what I can see ahead of you if you go into this principle. You lose your standing in the church and your good name among men. I wonder if you can stand to go to prison for this thing you are about to do." And I said, "Brother Woolley, I don't know. I don't think any man knows what he's able to stand until he actually goes through the experience. But I'm willing to try." He said, "That's all that's necessary." The Lord had said that all who have this law revealed unto them must obey the same, and Price had no peace of mind, nor could he rest until he had obeyed that commandment. When he did obey that law, he began to experience some of the troubles that often attend it. Shortly after returning from his second mission for the church he was arrested. His brother-in-law, his stake president, and a high councilman were the complaining witnesses against him. He went through a preliminary trial at Short Creek, Arizona, and later another trial at Kingman. He was convicted with a sentence of from 18 to 24 months, with 2 for 1 time off for good behavior. Later it was discovered that all of the evidence used against him at the trial was illegal. Then Price spent 27 days in the Kingman jail, which didn't count against his sentence, and then nearly a year in the Florence, Arizona, state prison. It was 1936, and for nearly that whole year, Price never got to see his family. He became the first man in Arizona to be imprisoned for plural marriage. After about a month in prison, Price was called up before the parole board. There were about 15 men present consisting of the parole board and prison officials. The chairman said, "Mr. Johnson, we have a letter from your wife applying for a parole. We will be glad to grant this, but in order to prevent your being sent back to this prison, you will be required to sign a statement agreeing to straighten out your family affairs, so you will be conforming with the law, and to agree to conform with the law in the future." Price stood up and replied, "Mr. Hoffman, I was put in this prison on the charge of open and notorious cohabitation, but this is not the real charge against me. The real charge is having more than one wife. This is an essential part of my religious belief, and I firmly that if I keep the covenants I made with these women, and with my God, I will have them in the eternal worlds after this life is ended, and before I would break these covenants, I would remain in this prison the remainder of my life. Yes, before I would break these covenants, I would go to that gas chamber over there." The heads of all the men on that panel bent down, and for a moment all was silent. Price then asked, "Is that all you want of me?" To which they replied, "That is all." After serving over 11 months in jail and prison, Price was released and returned to Short Creek. This noble warrior not only paid a price for his faith in the fullness of the gospel, but he left a most honorable example for many others who would soon be forced into prison.